Hi guys, I hope you're doing well. I'm back here today for another championship review, this time the review of Gameweek 45. So, for the majority of teams, it's their penultimate game of the season, but not for two right at the top of the table. But I'll get onto that in a second. But first of all, let's start with Blackburn nil, Bournemouth 3, in what was a pretty convincing win from Bournemouth. Of course, Blackburn had to win this game if they wanted to reach the top six, while for Bournemouth, they needed to make sure they got a win in order to stay clear of Forest, and that's exactly what Bournemouth did. They scored some lovely goals. I think all three goals were really well taken. The first one, of course, Dom Solanke was put through one-on-one, and he slotted past the goalkeeper. The second, it was just a great finish from Billing, and then Billing scored again to wrap up the win. But for Blackburn, they did have some good chances. Ben Brereton Diaz was put through on goal, and he had his shot, saved. But for them, despite the 3-0 loss, it could have been more, although they did have some good chances. But I guess it was always going to be very difficult for Blackburn to reach the top six at this stage of the season. But for them, they've had a phenomenal season, and the bigger picture for them is that Tony Mowbray won't be the manager next season. Of course, he's been the Blackburn manager for 5 years now, and I think he's done a really good job, given the budget they're on, given the amount of change they've had to deal with, and the issues they've had off the pitch. I think Tony Mowbray's done an excellent job of building a young squad and steadily increasing Blackburn's ability, really, because when he was a manager, Blackburn was struggling in the Championship and they got relegated to League One, but then they bounced straight back up, which actually is really hard to do because League One is so competitive. So from there, they kept building, and for the majority of the season, they were actually in the playoffs. So for them to tailed off towards the end of the season is very disappointing, but it's a difficult one because he's been in charge for 5 years, so I can understand why Blackburn fans may want change. But having said that, he's for the majority of his time at Blackburn steadily improved the squad, and I just with firing managers, like I've said, it's about who's better externally that can come in. I know obviously there are managers in work at the moment who you would argue are better than Tony Mowbray, but looking at the managers out of work, are there any that are better than Tony Mowbray? So, for example, Michael Appleton's been heavily linked to the job, and don't get me wrong, he's a promising young manager, but at this moment in time right now, I don't think he's a better manager than Tony Mowbray. And at Lincoln, he was there for 3 years and not exactly doing incredible things at Lincoln. Don't get me wrong, he's a good manager, but I just think Tony Mowbray is better. So it's a little bit confusing from Blackburn's point of view, and they're going to have a lot of change going into next season, of course, given Tony Mowbray's leaving, and probably you'd imagine the likes of Ben Brereton Diaz will probably be moved on, and loan players such as Kadra and maybe Jean-Paul Heck at centre-back. But for Bournemouth, massive win for them. They had to win, given that Forest, they were at home against Swansea and most likely going to win that game, and of course, Forest did. They won against Swansea 5-1. Forest created an XG of 4.16, which is brilliant. Sam Surridge had a hat-trick. He was excellent. He could have had more, to be fair, but he's stepped up in place of Keenan Davis, and he's performed really well. And Forest looked excellent. They could have had more goals. And just briefly touching on Swansea, they've still had a fantastic season, but after 4 draws in a row, where in a couple of those games they have collapsed, especially against Reading and Bournemouth, they've obviously now lost away against Forest, and it could have been a bigger scoreline if not for Fisher's really good saves. But for Forest, it now sets up a mammoth game away at Dean Court, Bournemouth Stadium. I cannot wait for that game. It is pretty much a playoff final, because if you look at the fixtures after that, Bournemouth play Millwall at home, which, given Bournemouth at home, they'll dominate possession. Bournemouth will probably win that. And Forest are away against Hull, who I think Hull are kind of on the beach now, especially after their 5-0 defeat against Bristol City. So if Forest and Bournemouth are probably going to win those games, it all comes down to this game where they play each other, because Forest have a slightly better goal difference, and if they win, they go above Bournemouth. It's simple as that. So obviously the advantage is for Bournemouth, given that a draw will be brilliant for Bournemouth, But given how far away Bournemouth were in second place for so long in the season, to now be a complete clash where basically the winner pretty much gets promoted is really exciting. So I cannot wait for that game. It should be really fun and interesting to watch. Of course, you've still got Huddersfield Town, who won 2-1 away to Coventry. They still could possibly sneak into the playoffs. I think from a Huddersfield Town's point of view, you just think, if they beaten QPR at home, then they really would be within a shout of finishing in the top two. But they've still got a small, slim mathematical chance. But nevertheless, they played away against Coventry and Huddersfield were very good for the win. And Harry Toffolo further highlighting why arguably he should have been in the team of the season with a stunning goal from him. And yeah, Huddersfield cruised to a 2-1 win towards the end of the game. Although Coventry, they did score right at the very end. And at the beginning of the game, they created some really good chances. I mean, watching the highlights, Coventry's off-the-ball movement is so good. It's absolutely fantastic. And like I said previously with Coventry, the key for them would be to keep the likes of Matt Godden, Victor Gyokeres, Gustav Hamer, and of course Callum O'Hare. If they can keep those guys, then Coventry have every chance of pushing for a playoff spot next season. Then a massive game in terms of the playoffs for 6th place especially. QPR 1, Sheffield United 3. QPR, of course, they announced the departure of Mark Warburton in what was a very strange statement where they praised Mark Warburton continually throughout the statement and how he's really implemented his own DNA into QPR and he set QPR up well and played a lot of good young players and bedded through those academy players, but also playing older players as well and building a great team, and then they're just going to let Mark Warburton go. I personally think it's extremely bizarre, similar to Tony Mowbray, but even more so with QPR, given they have really horrific financial issues off the pitch still, and Mark Warburton's been able to play really attractive style of football at Loftus Road or the Kyan Prince Foundation Stadium, and they've done so well in the market, buying free agents and older players, but then also playing a lot of academy players. So I think it's very bizarre Mark Warburton's leaving, but nevertheless, they played at home against Sheffield United. They started well, but as the game wore on, Sheffield United were just going up in the gears, and in the end, it was a comfortable win for Sheffield United. They did dominate QPR towards the end, especially at set pieces. So that win is a massive boost for Sheffield United because it made Blackburn and Millwall's task a lot harder to finish in the playoffs. But not necessarily for Borough, because Borough beat Stoke by 3-1, and they could still sneak into the playoffs. They play Preston away on the final day of the season, which I think is a relatively easy fixture, whereas Sheffield United have Fulham at home. And by then, Fulham will almost likely certainly be confirmed as champions. So they could be on the piss if if they play Sheffield United and just completely collapse. But it's still a relatively hard fixture for Sheffield United. So from Borough's point of view, they're not completely out of it. Very dominant win against Stoke. And it could have been hard for Borough because Stoke actually, in the last few weeks and months, whenever they played a good team going for promotion, they've won. So it could have been a harder fixture for Borough, but they were comfortable winners and they did a really good professional job. For Stoke, they've just not had a good season again, have they? And with Michael O'Neill, I don't know whether he should be the manager next season. For me, it's still kind of up in the air. And I guess that's probably how some Stoke fans feel. Although there are some angry Stoke fans online who do want Michael O'Neill to go, which, well, it's harder to argue with that as the games have gone on. Then you have Millwall 3, Peterborough 0. Millwall, the kind of last team possibly going for a playoff spot. Very comfortable home win against Peterborough. I mean, Peterborough did create some chances. Johnson Clark-Harris having a shot just going wide. But generally speaking, it was a very comfortable win for Millwall, especially once they scored first. And it could have been more, could have been 5 or even 6. If Millwall were to reach the playoffs, especially after Sheffield United's win, they needed to probably score more goals at Peterborough to up the goal difference. So it's still going to be very unlikely for Millwall to reach the playoffs, and also given they played Bournemouth away on the last day. Having said that, though, they've still had a phenomenal season, and Gary Rowett's still done an excellent job. And I can understand why some Millwall fans are frustrated with the style of football, because at times it has been poor. You know, the 0-0 draw at home to Borough, the 0-0 draw away from home against Blackburn, where they had no shots on target. However, Millwall have such a low budget in the Championship, and the quality of their squad is just not the same as the likes of Huddersfield and Forest and Bournemouth, and yet they're still competing at such a high end of the table. So, and also most Millwall fans are very patient in terms of style of football. So when you do hear some fans complaining about the style of football, it is alarming. But nevertheless, Millwall have done an amazing job, and Gary Rowett deserves a lot of respect. Then you have Bristol City 5, Hull 0. I said in the last few videos talking about Bristol City that their front three seems to be firing again, and that was definitely the case today. Weimann, Semenyo and Martin all scoring, all having brilliant games, and it's key for Bristol City to keep all of them for next season if they are to maintain a playoff push. As for Hull, they were really, really bad, really, really poor, not a good end to the season, and I think it's going to be similar when they play at home to Forest. Then you have Blackpool 0, Derby 2, further highlighting Derby's resilience throughout the season, and Eboué and Cashin scoring their first goals of the season. Whether they'll be at Derby next season remains to be seen, but for Blackpool, even though it's not the best result for them, they've still had a fantastic season, and Neil Critchley still deserves a lot of respect. Then you have Barnsley 1, Preston 3, very comfortable win for Preston. I know Barnsley did create a few chances, but Preston were the better team, and it's good for them because in recent weeks they haven't been particularly good, apart from the Blackpool win. Then you have Reading 0, West Brom 1. Not really surprised by this scoreline, to be honest. West Brom, I mean, I thought it'd be 0-0 given Reading are just not very good at keeping clean sheets, but West Brom are terrible going forward. But Reading, they were very, very poor, and look, they've been really good in the last few weeks and have earned their place in the Championship next season, but they were very bad today. I mean, there were barely any highlights of Reading chances at all. For West Brom, they could have had more goals, but in the end, it was just the one goal, and they're going to need all the help they can get for next season, to be fair, because I'm not still convinced by them. Finally, you have Cardiff 1, Birmingham 1. Not surprised that this result ended in a draw at all. Birmingham taking the lead, but then Cardiff scoring late on. Both teams have had really, really disappointing seasons. And for Cardiff, that's just summarised by the fact that Cody Dramer, who came in January, was voted Young Player of the Season and Player of the Season by the fans. I mean, you did have Players Player of the Season voted by Smithies, which is kind of justified, that's understandable, but whenever a goalkeeper wins Player of the Season, it is alarming. And then Ruben Colwell being awarded the Academy Player of the Season, which I think definitely deserved, and I can see him doing really well next season, to be fair. Cardiff are going to have to keep him in order if they're going to try and stay up in the Championship next season, because based on the evidence in the last few months, I think Cardiff will be towards the bottom end of the Championship next season. Of course, the only game that hasn't been played are Fulham and Luton. Basically, if both teams draw, they're pretty much secured in the playoffs. Luton just need a point to go on 73 points. They'll be done in terms of either finishing 5th or 6th. Fulham, if they draw, they will basically can't be caught by Bournemouth because they've got such a phenomenal goal difference. So maybe both teams might just take a draw. So that's the Championship review. Thanks for being patient with me if you are even watching this video. I really appreciate it because I've got a sore throat. So thank you for that. I'm just trying to get these videos out and just get them out to you guys and talk about them. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you very much. Thank you.